Alpine rescue. At first time I met Pascal Rousseau. He was telling me my climate models were wrong, and an avalanche was about to prove him right. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 26 years old, trained climatologist with NOAA's Rocky Mountain Division, and I've spent the last 4 years studying atmospheric conditions and early warning systems in the Colorado high country. I work with data, temperature gradients, precipitation rates, atmospheric pressure. These are the things I understand. I can predict weather patterns with 94% accuracy. I can model climate systems with precision that would have been impossible 10 years ago. What I can't do is look at a mountain and know what it's about to do. Pascal Rousseau apparently could. He arrived at the Estes Park research station on a Tuesday in September, sent by a collaborative program between the French Alpine Institute and NOAA. French-Swiss mountaineer, guide, avalanche specialist, 30 years old, with the kind of lean muscular build that comes from spending your life above tree line, and eyes that were currently looking at my climate forecast with a level of skepticism I wasn't used to. Your model shows the avalanche risk is minimal, he said, standing in front of my computer screen without invitation. His accent was French-inflected, layered with Swiss German from his mother's side. You predict the snow will stabilize after the warming trend passes, but you are not accounting for the weak layer. My data accounts for all relevant variables, I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. Temperature, precipitation, wind load, substrate condition, you account for what your instruments measure. He leaned closer to the screen, and I could smell the cold on him, actual alpine cold, not the air conditioning cold I lived in. You do not account for what you cannot see. The persistent weak layer in the snowpack, the temperature gradient that creates it, the structural failure point. Snowpack density varies within acceptable ranges for the data your instruments can gather. Pascal interrupted. Not acceptable for the avalanche that will fall if we do not respect what we cannot measure. I wanted to throw him out of my office. Wanted to tell him that NOAA science was peer-reviewed, validated, built on decades of research. That his gut feelings about mountains didn't matter when I had models and data and mathematical precision. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I asked him to show me what he meant. We spent the next 5 hours at my computer, with Pascal walking me through his methodology. He wasn't using instruments. He was using experience, 20 years of climbing in the Alps, the Himalayas, the Canadian Rockies. He was looking at my data and translating it into avalanche behavior in a way that my models weren't doing. Look at the temperature gradient here, he said, pointing to the data. Your model shows a smooth transition, but with this precipitation pattern and these wind conditions, you actually have a sharp boundary layer. The snow above it is sliding across the snow below it. When the weight exceeds the friction, he made a gesture like a structure collapsing. It falls. That's not in my data. That is exactly in your data. You are just not reading it the way an avalanche reads it. He turned to face me. I have seen this pattern before. In the Swiss Alps, 2008. In Chamonix, 2012. In the Himalayas, last year. The pattern always ends the same way, catastrophic collapse. If you're right, we need to notify the backcountry rangers. Alert any climbing parties in the high country. We should have already done that, Pascal said quietly. But first, you need to accept that your model is incomplete. That data is not the same as understanding. That precision and intuition are not enemies, they are partners. I called the Backcountry Operations Center. Told them to issue an avalanche alert for the high elevation zones above 10,000 feet. They pushed back. My standard forecast didn't suggest elevated risk. But I told them to trust me. More importantly, I told them to trust Pascal. Within an hour, they'd issued the alert. Within 2 hours, they'd begun coordinating with private climbing outfitters to ensure no expeditions were operating in the high-risk zones. By 03:00 hours, the avalanche came. I was still at the research station, staring at real-time data coming in from the mountain. Seismic readings showing the collapse. Acoustic sensors picking up the sound of snow failing. The exact scenario Pascal had predicted. He was standing next to me, hands gripping the desk. Expression unreadable. The rangers, he asked, all accounted for. No climbers in the impact zone. And the expedition on Mount Sherman. The private group. They were hiking in the lower elevations. They're safe. Pascal's hands unclenched. But his eyes were still fixed on the seismic data rolling across the screen. 43 years ago. He said quietly, I was climbing with a group in the Valais. We were in a zone that should have been safe according to all the data, all the models, all the science. An avalanche came that was not supposed to come. It killed 2 people. One of them was my father. I didn't know what to say to that. After that, Pascal continued, I dedicated my life to understanding avalanches in ways that instruments could not. I learned to read the mountains the way my father tried to teach me. I learned to see what was not visible on instruments. I thought I would never need science again. I thought intuition was enough. He finally looked at me. But today, your science saved lives. Your models showed the data. I showed you what the data meant. Together, we understood the mountain. I should have believed you immediately. No. You should have demanded proof. He smiled slightly. Which you did. You asked me to show you my methodology. You did not dismiss me because I did not have instruments. That is scientific integrity, even when someone is challenging you. The avalanche became a case study. The NOAA team analyzed the data. Pascal provided field observations. Together, we documented exactly what had happened a week later: the temperature gradient, the weight distribution, the exact moment of structural failure. We published a joint paper in the Journal of Glaciology about improving avalanche risk assessment. By combining climate models with on-site experience, the paper got attention. Other research stations started asking if they could incorporate Pascal's methodology into their forecasting. Universities wanted us to present at conferences. And Pascal stayed in Colorado. He said it was to finish the research, to refine the methodology, to make sure that the models actually worked before he returned to Switzerland. But I was pretty sure it was something else. We'd fallen into a rhythm. Pascal would arrive at the research station in the morning, with coffee he'd made at his rented cabin, and we'd review the atmospheric data together. I'd show him the models. He'd tell me what he saw in the mountains. We'd argue about interpretation, compromise on methodology, and end up with something neither of us would have created alone. You are a good scientist, he told me one morning, about 3 weeks after the avalanche. So are you? I was a good mountaineer who became a scientist. He corrected. You were born a scientist. You think in data, but you are learning to think in experience too. He paused. That is rarer than you realize. Why are you still here? I asked him directly. You finished the research consultation. The methodology is published. You could go back to Switzerland, because leaving means not seeing you anymore. Pascal said simply. And I do not want to not see you anymore. I didn't have an intellectual response to that, so I kissed him instead right there in the research station, with climate data on the screens and mountain views through the windows. Was that acceptable? He asked when I pulled back. That was more than acceptable. By November, snow was accumulating heavily in the high country. The winter came early that year. We'd predicted it based on atmospheric conditions, and Pascal had backed it up with his understanding of traditional mountain patterns. We'd issued forecasts, coordinated with rangers, and prepared the research station for the heavy season. Then we got the call at 14:30 hours on a Tuesday. We have a situation, the backcountry operations director said. Private climbing expedition on Mount Tory. 6 climbers guided by Aspen guides. They were supposed to summit and descend this morning, but they're delayed. They're now stuck on the mountain with incoming weather. We're trying to coordinate rescue, but the window is closing. Mount Tory. Elevation 14,267 feet. One of the more accessible high peaks, which meant it got climbers from all experience levels. And 6 climbers stuck high with a major storm incoming. How long until the weather hits? I asked, already pulling up atmospheric data. 2 hours. Maybe less. You're the expert, tell us. I looked at the data. Temperature gradient, moisture content, wind patterns. The storm was going to hit harder and faster than the climbers could descend in their current condition. 3 hours, I said. They have 3 hours. That's not enough time to evacuate them. Pascal was already standing up, moving toward the door. Where are you going? I asked. To get them, he said. The helicopter can't fly in the incoming weather. Then we do it on foot. Pascal was checking his climbing gear, pulling together emergency supplies. If the storm hits, and they are not down, they will die. We go now. Pascal, you can't climb Mount Tory in approaching winter weather. No, he looked back at me. We can climb it, because you will tell me exactly where the safe passages are. You will give me real-time data on the wind, the temperature, the conditions, and I will get those climbers down. That's insane. That is what we do. Pascal pulled on his climbing boots. You understand the data. I understand the mountains. Together, we keep people alive. I called the backcountry director. Got approval for what was probably the most insane rescue operation I'd ever been part of. Then I started feeding Pascal real-time atmospheric data while he climbed. The next 90 minutes were the longest of my life. Pascal was on the mountain with the 6 climbers, guiding them down using the safest routes that the atmospheric data suggested. I was in the research station, watching satellite imagery, tracking wind patterns, predicting snow stability, sending updates through radio. Wind from the northwest at 43 knots, I called. Temperature dropping to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility approximately 200 meters. You're approaching the unstable slope. Bear right. Rock corridor at 3 o'clock. Copy that. Pascal's voice came back, calm despite the conditions. The descending group was making progress. They were moving faster than I'd expected, which meant Pascal was not only navigating them safely, but also pushing them to move as quickly as conditions allowed. Storms accelerating, I reported. Wind gusting to 55 knots. You have approximately 45 minutes before visibility drops below safe descent parameters. We will be off the mountain in 35. Pascal said. And he was right. At 16:05 hours, Pascal and the 6 climbers reached the trailhead just as the full storm hit. Snow started falling so heavily that visibility went to nearly zero in minutes. If they'd been 30 seconds slower, they would have been caught on exposed terrain. The helicopter couldn't fly. The roads were becoming impassable. But Pascal had gotten them off the mountain using nothing but real-time atmospheric data and 30 years of climbing experience. Pascal spent that night at the research station. Because the roads were completely closed, we sat in the small office, watching the storm rage outside, listening to the wind that had almost killed 6 people. Thank you, he said. Sometime after midnight. For the data. For understanding what I needed. For being brave enough to send me out there. I was terrified you wouldn't come back. I know. He took my hand. But you also knew that if you did not send me, they would definitely not come back. So, you sent me anyway. That is love, Daniel. Not protecting someone from danger, but trusting them to face it. I don't want to face a future where I'm always sending you toward danger. Then come with me. Pascal said simply. Come to Switzerland. Take your data, your models, your research. The Alpine Institute would hire you immediately. We could study avalanche risk across all the Alpine regions. We could use your precision and my experience to keep people safe everywhere. I have a life here. A job, colleagues, research in progress. I know. Pascal released my hand. And I will not ask you to give it up. But I also know that I am in love with you. And I do not want to be in Switzerland while you are in Colorado. I thought about it all night. Thought about my job, my research, my carefully constructed life in the high country. Thought about Pascal, who'd come to prove that I needed to think differently. Who'd show me that data and experience weren't enemies but partners. By morning, I decided. The Alpine Institute, I said. Could they hire me permanently? Not just for a consulting contract. Yes, I already asked them, actually. After the rescue, they wanted to hire both of us. They have funding for a permanent position as chief climate analyst. You already asked them? I wanted to have options, Pascal said. In case you were willing to choose us over your current life. I'm choosing us, I said. But I'm not giving up my research. I'm expanding it. European avalanche risk, global climate patterns, everything we learned from this methodology. Then we are doing this? You are coming to Switzerland. Yeah, I said. I'm coming to Switzerland. Epilogue 6 months later, the Alpine Institute's new research center opened in May. Overlooking the Rhine Valley. Daniel Foster is the chief climate analyst. Pascal Rousseau is the lead field coordinator. Together, they've expanded the avalanche prediction methodology to cover not just Colorado's Rockies, but all major mountain ranges in the Alpine region. Their joint research has prevented 7 avalanche disasters in the past 6 months. They've saved lives they'll never know about, and they've proven that the combination of climate modeling and on-site experience is not just effective, it's revolutionary. I think about that first meeting a lot. How Pascal challenged my data. How I wanted to dismiss him as someone living in the past, trusting intuition over science. How I didn't realize that the most advanced science sometimes looks like a person standing on a mountain, understanding something their instruments can't measure. The Swiss Alps are beautiful in the spring. The snow melts into rushing streams. The valleys green up. And from our apartment in Chamonix, you can see Mont Blanc, the highest peak in Western Europe. Beautiful and deadly and worthy of absolute respect. Pascal was right. Data and intuition are not enemies. They're partners. And sometimes the person who challenges your expertise most fiercely is the person you're meant to build a future with. Last month, Pascal asked me to marry him on the edge of a glacier. I said yes. We're getting married in the fall, small ceremony at the base camp we use for research expeditions. With climbers and scientists and the people who understand that mountains are not obstacles, but teachers. The ring he gave me is sapphire, the color of the Colorado sky where we met. The color of the Alpine sky where we're building our future. Some people are born scientists. Some people are born mountaineers. Some people spend their lives learning that the two disciplines are saying the same thing. That understanding the world requires both precision and intuition, both data and experience, both the willingness to question and the humility to learn from someone who sees things differently. I was one of the second kind. Pascal taught me to be the first kind. Together, we're becoming something neither of us could have been alone. The mountains have taught us that lesson. And every day that we keep people safe in those mountains, we're proving it's true.